Well, Amy is a member of Candlelight, and she is part of a group of people that I meet with on a fairly regular basis for political advice and briefings. As you know, I'm supposed to be a pastor, not a politician, and I don't have time to do all the homework and research on everything political. And so every Monday morning, they give me a briefing on everything going on, local, state, national, so that I have better information, and so it's helpful. So, yeah, Davalu, of course, has a legal mind. She's former FBI.
No, not the FBI.
I thought it was FBI.
HSI, Customs and
Oh, okay, I thought it was that. And so she always has amazing insights that are helpful to me, and that's why when I talked on the phone, I said, "Is it okay if I have somebody join it?" And so, are you guys here on like official business? Are you ordained? But it helps me to be able to see and know things that I would not know on my own, like certain claims. I'm going to do this. Well, can it even be done? A lot of people that say they're going to do certain things, and I've seen that in the national level like crazy. So I just want to have that extra help. So she's not here to protect me.
Not only was I in law enforcement, but I've done analysis. The Attorney General's office. I did that for 6.5 years. In a more civil kind of thing, but background is investigative and analytical. I am not familiar with it, but typically, here's my legal brain picking. Privilege only involves if he's counseling you or something like that, community conversation. This is not a pastor. And you started out by we're here to have an open conversation. So if it's an open conversation about what they publicly stand for and publicly believe, it should be something that the community should already be aware of. So I don't know that that's even applicable for us. And if we're hiding stuff, I think that's a breakdown in what this meeting's supposed to be all about. Is this stuff that Dan has never made public? Are you the one that found that statute? I see why any of this would be privileged if it's from you and you're from us. Sorry, I just don't taken aback that you with this. I mean, the people to vote for Dan. And you want to share, taken aback by that. Explain to us who North Idaho Shore Growth is, who the board of directors is at the state with it. So what significance do you place on something that's from, if it's just one person that owns it, why that person's information or opinion significant enough that you believe that? And a researcher for who, does she have a background in that? Would you be surprised to hear her name is Teresa Wall? And are there any other, is she registered with the state? Is North Idaho Slow Growth registered as a business with the state or board of directors? Okay, so you said, and I'm a fly person. That's what I am. And so you said you believe some of the stuff is on their websites. Have you gone point by point to try to compare it and see and verify that everything she says is in fact on their website? I'm not legal counsel. I'm just I can ask Paul if he knows. Do you know what a fusion center is?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't know who Saroth is. That's why she says, I don't have time to get into the minutia of everything political. That's not.
It's not an attack, and I know sometimes I have a tone of voice problem, but I know that in talking with him, he is so busy that oftentimes he may not understand. And we who may understand this and have done our research, we take for granted that it's just like agencies coming from the federal government. We use acronyms all the time. We just take for granted that people know what acronyms are. And they don't have a clue what we're saying because we're talking in acronyms. When you say Fusion Center, does everybody know what the Fusion Center? So that's kind of important for him to understand for you to understand, to make sure that you know what a Fusion Center is. Because I've talked to people on both sides of the aisles on any number of topics. Say, well, X. Well, do you know what X is? Well, I think it's this when it's actually this. It's understanding the terms. And I think you'll see in our political campaigns now that oftentimes when we talk about we use words, but we both are defining them differently. And so therefore we're like this because we don't have the same understanding. So that's all I'm trying to do is make sure that we're all understanding these terms and these people and these organizations. I think pretty much everything you said is right on. Fusion centers were created after 9/11 by DHS because the reason that DHS was created was because there was a breakdown in communication between agencies, therefore, and it was mainly between the FBI and immigration. And they dropped the ball, and these terrorists got in the country, and then 9/11 happened. So it was an attempt for interoperability so we wouldn't have a natural disaster like that again.
Okay.
FEMA was also placed under DHS, so the Secretary of DHS, whether you like them or not, because I don't, it does contain FEMA, so that's a mandated responsibility. And any natural disaster also has to have intel sharing and has to have law enforcement response. So yes, the Fusion Center is comprised of all that. The Mossad training, that is on the website. All that stuff, and the sheriff has been through that. He said that publicly. Yeah. That is, the Fusion Centers have an anti-terrorist component to them, and so the best training that anybody can get anywhere on how to prevent terrorism is through Mossad and through the Israelis because they.
This is the recent, right?
Primary.
So he's been through this before.
Who?
Bob.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if the 4 year ago, because he might have already thought to himself, look, you guys already know all this. This could be abbreviated just because he is thinking in expedition, So defending anything, I'm just saying that came across my mind. I'm sorry. I guess I wanted to reflect on that just for a second.
Sure, go ahead. I'm just looking for that old survey.
Yeah.
Is what I'm doing. I'm not sure I'm going to find it.
The Reserve Deputy Program, I think that's self-explanatory. To develop a citizen's posse of vetted individuals to assist the sheriff office in times of need to help maintain law, order, and security as mandated by law. I'm not being defensive or argumentative, but all of this looks to me like it is summarized in this brief. It's one and the same. This is detailed, and that is just a introductory comment that could include all this. Just wondering about that. If it's even possible, if it's legal, if it's financial, it seems to be like it would be highly unlikely to be reasonable in relationship to the liability problem.
So, do you know, to try to fill that in so we'll understand, do you know what the purpose of the posse would be? Okay, but you don't know, so you can explain it just because obviously we don't have time to listen to the podcast. Okay, and how that different than the, what's it called, the Kootenai County currently has the Sheriff's Department works with the emergency management, and they have a 200-member-ish volunteer group that already do like search and rescue to be stood up. If there's a problem, they train and everything. How is that different? Do you mind if I ask a few more questions about that? Because I'd like to, it will, or maybe even inform you some things. Okay, so he says he wants to institute a reserve program. Is that okay? So there was something that passed in the legislature this last session that, and I don't have it, but it somehow put a wrench in the reserve program. So the reserve program and POST is the academy that law enforcement attends in the states. And so all those standards and that academy is administered through legislation by the state. And something happened legislatively that caused POST, even though Reserve Academy is still on their website, they are not holding any, and they won't even answer any questions about reserves right now because apparently that legislation put something at odds. And also, reserve officers in the state of Idaho have to be employed and paid. They're not free. and that's by statute. So that
Foreign
obviously is in
liabilities,
exactly
insurance.
exactly.
Okay.
So just so you
Yeah,
understand.
I do get that.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
good.
My Norse is. This is the one from the paper. I didn't find the KCRCC, but it's got like all his schools. It's a much more.
I had a feeling
Much
that might be
more
the case. I
robust.
hadn't seen her, so it makes sense in a way because by this point, he probably thinks, look, you guys already know what I'm doing, to be abbreviated. And of course, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and again, I don't know this to be a fact, but I think he has the endorsement of the KCRCC.
Who, Bob?
Bob.
As looking, he got the endorsement before Dan changed parties.
To independent.
And
Yeah.
Dan is now running as an independent.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm only thinking about the nature of why the statement is brief compared to elaborated upon. And if I were Dan, I would elaborate too, because nobody knows anything about what he thinks. Whereas maybe Bob thinks everybody knows what I believe already. So I don't know.
Okay, just to let you know, on more questions, but I'm not going to ask him because they take up all the time. I think the statements are awesome. Anybody wants to do that. Question is, how do you do that? Because I can say that I'm going to be queen of the world, and it may sound good, but is it even possible for me to do that? So there are some underlying issues with some of those things that the probability of a local sheriff even being able to do that is called into question, whether it's immigration enforcement. Immigration enforcement rests in the authority of the federal government, and that's constitutional. The only way that a local sheriff or even a police department administer any kind of immigration authority is to be delegated that from the federal government. And the federal government, since Obama, has not delegated that authority to anyone except jails and prisons. And so it's not like, so when you say I'm gonna, or I'm gonna keep this terrorist free, or that sounds great and we all want that. I think what we want to understand is how. And how is that different than what the incumbent is already doing? What's wrong with what the incumbent's doing that makes Dan's plan better? But there's no plan. I mean, I'm gonna do it. I'm Dan. I'm gonna do it, and I love that. But how?
Forgive me. I think that's well stated. And with my experiences, I told you the phone. Bob and I have been working together now very closely for last few years. And for example, in this particular context, we've worked together on this, and I am now more aware than I ever was before on what he legally can and cannot do. But even then has been very proactive in doing what I've asked him to do. I think I told you on the phone that he's never let me down. I realize that there are people that have been disappointed for a lot of reasons, but my personal issues, example, there was a busload of people being dropped off, and I called them and I said, hey, go check it out. He went over, checked it out. They were all legal. But they wouldn't look legal to me. And if they weren't legal, what are you going to do? And so he's thought this through as well, and I get it. And I do appreciate it, that there is some sense of protectiveness. Were you here last night for church?
I was not.
Yeah. One of our veterans went like nuts. And I had to hold back my own emotions because the illustration I used was, we got a major illegal immigration problem, and our borders being wide open, and now with all this nonsense you're hearing from Kamala Harris. At what point do we end up reacting in a way that we cannot exercise? I mean, for my emotions are we going to wait till they're busting down my front door? At what point do I say, no, you're not coming into my house? The reaction of the American population that are conservative feel the same way about the border. Nearly to the point where we're going to say, well, we're going to just create our own army, and we're going to go position ourselves, and our snipers are going to take you out if you cross our border. And you realize you can't, unless we're ready to have a civil war. Of course, none of us want that. And so these things make me very nervous. Mm-hmm. Inciting that kind of emotion in our populace I'll use an illustration because my wife and I were talking about this. Gosh, I think it was maybe in 2000 when we were COVID. Everything was crazy, and Brenda and I were talking about Civil War and what could be taking place in the neighborhoods and so forth. And I told her, I said, I want you to put this in perspective. Are you willing to shoot David? David lives next door to me. He is my neighbor, and he's a liberal, and he would be my adversary. And all of a sudden, you sober up really quick when you think about the horrifying nature. I mean, nobody in their right mind should ever want a civil war. I mean, it's inevitable in some ways in my mind, but oh man. Admittedly, this is my first comment that I'm going to say. It scares me a little to have a guy like Dan incite that kind of thinking, because I don't know that he knows what he's saying. And there is a Bundy-like spirit on that. Do you know what I mean by that? Do you know what I mean by Bundy? And some of the family issues that they've had in their properties, and friends of mine that went to prison. One of my very closest friends for many, many years was Todd Engel. Todd Engel, he went to prison for a long time. Do you know Todd?
I've heard the name, but I don't know him. No.
I led him to the Lord. I discipled him, and he had this, what I would call the Bundy spirit, if you want to use that terrible expression, which now I'll ask for confidentiality as well. And I used to try to talk him off the line all the time. I said, dude, you got to stand down. You can't do this. Until finally, when the Bundy Ranch issue came up, there, and he ended up getting everything he owned seized. Went for many years, and I remember. Sorry, this is emotional for me.
No.
Really emotional for me, because I led him to the Lord and I discipled him. I sat outside of that prison in Lompoc, California, I think it was, and my wife and I sat there and I prayed for him and just wept and wept and wept, knowing that the guy that I led to Christ was behind those doors for trying to do what he believed, but he went about it the wrong way and overreacted to the point where he ended up going to federal prison. He's now out. But wow, I don't want us to become incited, and it makes me nervous. And I realize that I get it. This is why I brought up last night. Sorry, I'm taking too much time. When the veteran spoke up, and by the time he had the microphone, we do live Q&As. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. He didn't ask a question. He went on a rant. He finally brought it around to a question like, what are we going to do? And of course, my first question is, I'm a theologian, but everything in me was, even as calmly as I want to approach these things legally, ethically, morally, biblically, I lean right in hard. That's why I said, if it was my front door, what would I do? That's why I want to tell Nancy Pelosi, take the front door off your house. And if you're going to talk about this like that, then take down the gates and take down your security and just let them come move into your living room. Exactly what she's doing on a larger scale, and we don't see it that way. But man, we can't react poorly. It requires so much careful, legal, ethical, moral thought. That one, I'm sorry, I'm capitalizing on it. It scares me to death of a Dan Wilson. If he's going to get the guys that are just right on that edge, they're going to go over and do the Todd Engel factor. And man, that worries me. Is that okay to say it that way?
No, I think it is okay to say that. Well, and the problem, when you brought up about Norris talking to the people on the bus, it is actually, they're not even authorized to ask somebody what their citizenship is, unless they're processing into the jail as part of their bio, and if the person doesn't want to tell them, they don't have to tell them.
I don't know that he did.
Well, no, but I'm just saying, I'm not saying that he did anything wrong.
Yeah.
I'm saying that, and I watch the news all the time, and we talk about, irregularities. The problem is that this administration is people can't, you're purple, I came across the border, you're from XYZ country, we're going to deport you. Because this administration has given them refugee status or asylum status to these people because they're here legally. So, yes, we have an immigration problem, but this administration has made it almost impossible for anybody to do anything about it. And it's just crazy by that. It doesn't matter who the sheriff is. If the person's legal and they've got papers, we may not like it, but that's what the Biden administration has done to us. I definitely think that's something that Bob and Bill don't share that in common, because
Agreed.
what the sheriff is
100%.
doing now.
It's high on his register priority list, even though it's not. That's why I wanted to mention it, because I know him and I know the way he's functioning in that arena. And so, anyway, I've taken a lot of your time now, so I'm going to.
Hated, and it's just like we throw up our hands, like you say. What are we going to do
Well,
about it?
comment. If they came in here illegally, they did.
What is the violation of law
Yeah.
that a local sheriff can arrest somebody on or can enforce on somebody that's smuggling? Because that's a federal statute that's reserved for federal law enforcement. Like it or not, constitutional or not, that's the way it is. And I don't, but actually constitutionally it says that. But even the way that it's been interpreted through the courts over the years,
We have
the
a
way it
much
is.
bigger problem than we can solve locally.
oh yeah.
And the
that's-
courts is a big start.
Because I've actually worked on human smuggling cases where people were being smuggled across the border and then on into the interior. And so what that would take to get it prosecuted with the U.S. Attorney's Office would be you have to have two witnesses. That group, they automatically get a visa, testify, and then they get bond, go up to testify, and their visas can be canceled, but where are they? You can't find them. It's hard. It's even hard for the federal government to do it
Because of the broken system.
because of the laws.
By the time they catch
lack
and
of
release, they
enforcement.
have a court date that's 3 or 4 years from now. They have a free
Yeah.
pass for 3 or 4 years.
Immigration judges are administrative judges, and so you know what that means. By an administration that has a bent one way or the other. So if you continue with a liberal president, vice president administration, the continuation of liberally appointed judges is going to continue. So all these people that have this temporary status in the United States to be here, when their court date does come up in front of that judge, what do you think? They're going to be liberally interpreted to, oh yeah, you have asylum, yeah, you have whatever, and you can stay here. And so that's something you can't fix short of federal legislation, and you can't. It's frustrating when you can't do anything about it. You can arrest all the bodies you want to. So let's say somebody commits an assault, and Dan or Bob arrest them and find out they're illegal. So one of two things will typically happen. So if for some reason that person is given bond to await those charges in court, if ICE doesn't take them, well, ICE can take them and deport them, which means those charges stay outstanding and they never serve prison time. They're never held accountable. Or they come in, they're probably going to be given bond because the system's broken and most people make bond. And they're going to abscond and they'll never stand for those charges. If they do stand for those charges and go to prison, once they're out of prison, depending on what the administration, the federal administration's priorities are, they may be released right back out on the street illegally, and nobody will deport them. Because if the federal government doesn't deport them, I can't take them down there. You know, I'd love to take a bus and take them. Just another caveat that a lot of people don't understand. And I just recently explained this to my husband because he didn't understand that. So if you have a person here that's illegally here from, let's say, Cuba, the only way that we can send them back is if we have a treaty to go through with that person. Cuba won't take them back, send them back. If they're from Honduras, but they don't have any travel documents, we have to work government to government to get that person issued a passport. If they're a citizen of Honduras, or we can repatriate them to Honduras. And we can't kick them through Mexico because Mexico's going to want to see their travel documents. Belonging to Mexico. So we have people that are either sitting in immigration detention right now or that are out on bond from immigration that'll probably be here the rest of their lives because we can't send them back to their country because the political are like this. So much bigger. We can't fix this locally. We can arrest everybody that's breaking the law. I think that's great, and we should, because it'll discourage people to not come to our community. And I think that Bob has tried to do that. I think Dan has the intention to do that. But the reality is, no matter what you do, you're either going to hopefully teach that person that they can't live in the community and commit crimes, go somewhere else, which now becomes somebody else's problem. But you can't fix the fact that they're illegal and get them out of the area because they're illegal.
as much as we hate it.
So that's just unfortunately the reality of how broken the federal government.
The actual deputies and or civilian deputized people that work like in the DMV and that kind of thing.
That's my question. I got an article here, Russ. Yeah.
Because don't all the employees that work in the Department of Motor Vehicles aren't they all sworn?
I don't know the answer to that question, and I think my question
might
is,
be.
I don't know the answer to this question. I know partial answer. I don't know what it means to be a special deputy. Ask Sheriff Norris point blank, does Matari have access to the database, the law enforcement database? And he told me no. I have asked that of other people in the Sheriff's Department about that, or that, and it's not a cross designation. It's an advisory deputization. Cross designation is different, at least historically in my mind, from what I've been through. So the like NCIC, which is the National Crime Information Center database, restricts who can even have access to that. When a dispatcher, when a call comes in from a deputy or a police officer on the street, can you run XYZ? They put in the designator for that officer so that it creates an electronic log, can be researched later if somebody runs something they shouldn't.
Sure.
So, because I'm like, you mean this guy? I was concerned. Does this guy have access to this? Told by the sheriff and others that that is not what that is. That I was told that the status was so that for that particular instance, so that Bruce could attend some of the meetings that the sheriff had to attend, where there might be information that wouldn't normally be released to the public that here. And that's what I was told. But I keep hearing this special deputy run around, but nobody can seem to define what that is or what the process is. Is it on an honorary title? What does it in? So what is Dan's understanding of what that is? Well, it definitely started out, the relationship started out before Matari became a commissioner. He was his campaign manager. Campaign managers and everything, they stuff for the purpose of being, I mean, if he's his campaign manager, he's going to work with him in areas where we may be talking about, well, Davalu is, we're going to have to conduct a SWAT raid on Davalu's house, and if Matari happens to be sitting in or happens to overhear that because he's accompanying the sheriff, you wouldn't want that out. So the deputization would, according to what is even said in the news that I'm looking at, would allow Matari to be part of that, but then not disclose. Law enforcement doesn't disclose, so, and the public should not know everything that law enforcement is doing, because otherwise they could never conduct an investigation. But with Matari, the sheriff came from California, Matari came from Virginia. They didn't know each other until they got here. And I don't know how they became friends or how they became involved with that first campaign, but I don't know if what I'm trying to understand what makes that suspicious.
I'll at least give you this comment from me personally. So don't feel that I would be defensive about that. And as a sheriff's office, and that's deputization too. And I was in the offices. I heard everything. I saw everything. I did ride-alongs. I didn't do jail. I was a patrol chaplain, and so I kind of understand all that stuff. But my position here, and you're saying that this stuff all stays in the room. Kind of comfortable saying this to you. I don't like it. I don't the tight relation between them. In fact, and Bob knows this, told him to his face, eye to eye. And I also advocated strongly for John Padula to be on the county commissioners, and even though he did not win, even in my conversations with Bob after the election, when now Eberline is the guy, which was not the guy that Bob wanted. I was happy that Eberline won, not Bob's guy, because I was wanting to be certain that there was some check and balances there. Another question, why? Why would that work? There is a very simple answer, and this is going to sound like something that I am opposed to Bob about. And I'm not blind. I don't see him as an angel walking on clouds. He wants the power. He wants to be able to get done his agenda, some of which I really like. I'm looking ahead at some of your notes, and yeah, we're limited on time about the budget and all the increases in the budget. I am applauding him for that. And I know that would be exactly the opposite of what you would probably want him to pay those deputies more. I want them to improve their serve. And so this is, again, where you might end up with a conflict of concepts. And we couldn't even keep a deputy in this town because they were getting paid worse than an elementary, And so you better believe I want him to have a bigger budget. And I realize that the county commissioners have power. So now I'm not advocating for or against, but I understand a human motive. And if he has a human motive and he has an agenda and he wants to accomplish it, he's going to look for people that he can work with. That's what's happened. And this is also why I say check and balance. Let's not have a monopoly. And which is one of the reasons I was after Padula, because I knew that Padula would be the tension in the room, as if Leslie isn't already.
And I totally endorse everything that you just said.
Okay.
Everything. The problem is a lot of people don't understand perception is reality.
Yeah.
So there may be absolutely nothing nefarious about anything.
Right. But if it looks
bad,
suspicious.
Because I know personally that it was brought up to Matari that the perception looked bad between him and Bob. And that as a county commissioner, he should not be involved in Melissa's campaign. And the response, basically there's no law against it. And so Idaho does not have an ethics commission. So you can't even report what appears to be an ethics violation. So yeah,
It doesn't mean we have to like it.
We don't like it. And do I like that relationship? No. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, we're probably on the same team there. Yeah, we've had an hour. But let me be generous and gracious to you, and let me just extend another 10 minutes for it. I can only say this about that. I don't know anything about it. But even in context, I don't want to rely on Spokane. And I think it's kind of cool that he raised $500,000 from private donors. I mean, I know the minutiae, so I don't have an opinion. But I will at least say that I'm not really a big fan of trying to be partners with Spokane. Something called Spokompton.
He does. Do you know their relationship? Yeah, what's been illegal about that? 2B visas are legal immigration. Just there are a certain number of visas that are issued by the State Department. State Department issues visas. So neither the Sheriff's Department nor Terry issue visas. But yes, Terry is, it is a nonprofit, just so you know. The helicopter is a nonprofit. And they raise funds. The Sheriff's Office gave $100,000 of asset forfeiture money, which is federal money for things that they seize. You seize a car, they can share that back.
Yeah.
And then the $10,000 that they normally would give Spokane.
It wasn't our tax.
It wasn't our tax money.
Tribe gives away millions of dollars every year.
And do you know that the Coeur d'Alene tribe, they're a sovereign nation, putting with the federal government?
Derail you, but interesting side note. They gave a bunch of money to Coeur d'Alene High School. Coeur d'Alene High School has their logo burned into their football field. Removed the cross. Attorney for the Coeur d'Alene tribe early this week, I think it was. And I told him about that, and he went ballistic. Cannot remove the cross from our logo. Because the Coeur d'Alene, if you go right over here to Coeur d'Alene High School, that football field, and look at the logo, the cross is missing. I mean, of course, then I was meeting with him about the parade. A bunch of noise about that. I'll get a lot of it.
I don't know anything about that council. Where did that whose interpretation or of that organization is that? That's from Teresa Ross.
Department of Homeland Security?
Well, the State Department issues visas.
Yeah.
And CIS, under the Department of Homeland Security, works with them. So,
just for your information, on through that process with Austin, it took us 3 years to be done. And we had to hire lawyers to get him his R1 visa. And so he's here legally, otherwise it would be an illegal, and he literally was running for his life. We rescued him out of Thailand, when he was from Pakistan, and they wanted to kill him. It's terrible. So I'm not sure I dislike that. I'm just giving you fodder here. So.
Now, I've heard Mayor say that, and many things. He supports people that get H-2B,
Yeah,
an H-1B and an H-2B visa, because it's the legal way to do things.
Right.
It's not illegal immigration to get an H-1B and an H-2B visa.
Question for you. I'm going to cut you off. Sorry. Is Dan Wilson a white supremacist? Okay. What's his position on Israel? I'm going to tell you why I'm concerned about it. Because I see some of the strongest supporters and the noisy ones that are anti-Semites, and that terrifies me. I've listened to him enough to know that I dislike him a lot because he is bad-mouthing constantly, and I don't like that kind of campaign. In fact, I've had this conversation with many people, and you guys know that people generally, I told you this, I told you it sounds arrogant. Almost everybody that runs for office comes and sees me personally. They make an appointment, they get into my office. This was a one-liner email. I told you, get to know me, here's how to get a hold of me. I don't pursue them. They pursue me. And when I see any of these people, doesn't matter who they are, I always tell them, campaign on what you do, not what the others don't do. Talk about you, the positive things you want to bring to our community, not the negative things you think others are doing. Dan is a mudslinger, and I dislike it a lot. And I don't want to see Bob do that, and Bob knows it. I've told him to his face, take the high road. Don't go there. Don't get into a pissing match with this guy. And to me, when I have watched Dan, even the front page of his website is a documentation of everything that he hates about Bob Norris. It is. I've seen it. Now, maybe they've changed it. I looked at his website twice. Both times I looked at it, it was a Bob bashing website. And I don't go there. That just doesn't work for me. Not to mention, now I'm going to be a jerk because I know you're here to try to get me to pay attention to Dan Wilson. Dan Wilson has not done a thing to get my attention. He has not called, asked for an appointment, offered to take me to dinner, to lunch. He's not wined and dined me. And you know what? It sounds arrogant, but that doesn't fly with me. If you want my attention, come and talk to me. And I would like to put him on the hot seat. I'd like to put him on a stool in front of this church. We're going to ask you a bunch of questions. Answer it. And that's the way I want to approach it. Not go through all the potentials of what might be, or it looks funny, or it's a potential. Forgive me, I look further with another person. I would at least get the one that he did 4 years ago, because that if you read this consistently, these short answers are the bullet, the elaborated and exhaustive, same thing. One word versus a paragraph. And so in contending for Dan, if that was Senda, think that through. Can we still be friends after? Tell them I hate politics.
He does.
I hate it. I don't want to fight with anybody. I don't be divided like this. Even the Idaho rejects hate stuff and my outspoken. I have appealed to them just to think. Do you hate heroin addiction? Do you hate rape? Don't say carte blanche. Idaho rejects hate. That isn't thinking. I want us to think because our community deserves it. Amen. All right. Continue my waxing stupid. If I were Dan, and the sheriff, who is the actual sheriff right now, was giving a contender a slice of his time to say, if you have anything really, you adjust your schedule and I will meet with you. If I were Dan, I would have done it. If I had the proof, if I had the documents, if I had answers, I would rearrange my entire life because it's a campaign now. If I were Dan Wilson, I would have said, name it, time, place, I'll be there. Play the games of, I didn't negotiate that with you. If he really wants to contend with him, contend. Advising Dan Wilson right now. Why I always love the fact that he says, show me the money. Show me the proof. Don't make accusations. Don't make hearsay. Don't make potentials. Don't make it looks funny. Give me the actual fact. Committed a crime. What have I done? And forget me now, I'm going to pull myself completely out of Dan and Bob. I have to deal with this stuff all the time as a pastor. Not only in a 2,000-member church, but in a community where I'm the pastor, the president of the Ministerial Association, where I'm dealing with the city and when I'm dealing with the county, with all the stuff that I do. It is constant. I am always being accused of something. And I always tell them, show me the money. Bring the accusation, not what you thought you heard, not what you heard. Tell me what you saw. Come and talk to me to my face. This is a problem of being a public figure. And both Dan and Bob now are public figures. And it is just so wrong. It just sets so wrong with me. For example, somebody will say, we're leaving Candlelight. And they'll say, well, did you go talk to Paul? No. Well, why are you leaving? Well, we heard. It is heartbreaking to me. I literally have spent years crying. People I love that leave the church with a misunderstanding. Here's a perfect example. How long have you been around? When we bought this building, I told the sellers that we have to have a easement for the parking lot because it was skating rink, and they weren't selling the skating rink. And I said we have to have a crossover easement. So if you ever sell that property, I have to have first right of refusal. So this is all part of our deed when we purchased it. A few years later, he calls me and says, "Hey, we're going to close the skating rink and we're selling the property. Do you want it?" I said, "Yeah, I have to have it. It's not a matter of want." Even though the crossover easement was perpetual, so a new owner, somebody could have bought this property, and I still had access to available. Now, Gold's Gym was going to buy that property, and they were going to build a gym on the parking lot, right in the front. We would have lost parking, we'd have been out of business, just like that. I had to buy it, so I told them, we'll buy it. It was just not even a negotiation, and this all happened over the phone. So I called our bank, and I said, I need $2 million. And they said, done. Thank God, because we had credibility, we established ourselves in the community, and so they said, but you're going to have to raise 30%, so $600,000. I said, no problem. I went back. I was in Georgia when I got the phone call. This all happened over the phone. Came back, met with the elders, says, hey, we need to buy this property. What do you guys think? And they all said, yep. So I said, we got to raise $600,000. I said, okay, let's start a campaign. I went in front of the church the following Sunday, told them what was going on, told them we need to raise $600,000. Everybody was excited. They started giving. Between Sundays, I got a call from the bank, and they said, hey, we've been crunching numbers. You can do this for 25% down. So we need to raise $500,000. And so I said, great. So next Sunday I went to church, and I told everybody the bank called me. We only have to raise $500,000. Everybody's excited. They're still giving. The next Sunday comes around, and between Sundays I had gotten another call from the bank, and they said, we really like what you're doing. We want to lower it to 20%. All you have to do is raise $400,000. And all of a sudden, I go to the church, I tell them the bank call, I'm telling the story, everybody's excited. Ooh, wait, not everybody's excited. All of a sudden there's an uprising. Paul's just manipulating us. Paul is lying. Because the number changing, and legitimately, it was 100% true. And let me tell you what happened. We lost probably 40 major donor families, lost an income of over $10,000 a month. And in those days, that was a lot more than it is now. But still, $10,000 a month right now would put 3 or 4 of our staff out of work. Like that. We even had people meeting with the elders, interviewing with our realtor, looking up documents, every bit of documentation, and finally came and met with the elders, and after every elder, you ready, conspired to lie to cover up for me, which was no lie, said at the end of an elders meeting, I wish I had a lie detector test so I could just test all these lies. In other words, accused every elder in unity of conspiring to lie, and they all left the church and created a bunch of noise. Heartbreak. This is what leaders deal with, and I hate it. That's why I hate mudslinging, because then they leave the church, they're like the disgruntled employee, they got something to say. People go around doing this stuff, and it's horrible. It destroys families, it destroys life. My wife, my kids are so damaged by the ministry that one of my daughters has renounced her faith. She lives in New York. She won't even talk to me. 3 years she hasn't talked to me. The 3 kids struggle terribly with They're believers, but they struggle with the church and people and Christians. I don't want to be around them. They don't have to. Where does he go to church? I think I know some of it. Can I tell you what I've heard, and you can tell me if it's true? This is for our conversation. What I've heard is that he was a evangelical Christian, and then he became a Catholic. And then, as a Catholic, he had an affair with his assistant, divorced his wife. His present wife was his former assistant. Now they're married, and he got excommunicated from the Catholic Church because of it. Conversation has not left my lips ever. Will admit this has been one of my, you talk about what perceptions, I've thought to myself the same thing. Well, if he's really this, why isn't he here? Or, for example, why didn't he come to the Jim Jordan event? I mean, why, of all the places in the world to be, as a campaigning future potential sheriff, I would have never missed that. Because everybody that would be the strongest advocates for conservative values would have been in this room that night. And here, I was looking for him. And I don't know if he's even going to be on the cruise for Russ Fulcher that's coming up next Friday. So I'm looking at all these things as an outsider, and again, a guy that hates politics, and all I can see is mudslinging and lack of credibility from my vantage. I talked about, I was asked to be the pastor of the representative. So my advice to Dan, since you guys will probably reflect with him on this, take the high road, do the right things, stand for what you believe in, and don't create your campaign as a smear campaign, and he'll get much farther. He won't win this election. It's too late, in my view. The sheriff will win, and in part, the reason the sheriff will win is because of the way Dan has handled the smear campaign factor. And that doesn't mean that Dan doesn't have maybe a lot to offer our community. It would be so much better if we could find a way to work together, pray, and we'll just call it. Because I don't want us to have to be in this condition. And for example, if I knew John Padula was going to lose, did I actually think he was going to win? It didn't matter. I made myself the adversary to the sheriff. My friend, Bob Norris, my friend. I made myself an adversary to him because I sided with my other friend, John Padula, against the candidate that he wanted. And so I just don't play the political games. I have loyalties. And my loyalties right now are with Bob, in spite of him. Read that well. This guy has never let me down. If I call him and say I need something, he's there. If he needs something. And so, from my vantage point, I'm now reiterating the idea of our being able to find ways to work together and to be stronger as a result, a very big deal to me. And again, I'm only giving you my perceptions. Who's going to listen? Where did he come from? Why did he come here? Why is he attacking our sheriff? He's my friend. I don't know anything about this guy, and he doesn't have the respect from me to come to me directly. And forgive me again. I carry a lot of weight in this thing. I would think that would be if this guy was wise, he would have said, I'm going to get to Van Noy before I get to anybody. So forgive me for that. That sounds terribly arrogant. Even then, I'm being careful about this in public on Sundays because we have people in this church that I love dearly that are divided over this. Candlelight divided. I'm just trying to keep my mouth shut. Pray, and because you know, we have some very, very wonderful people that go to this church that are very outspoken in favor of Dan, and they've approached me too, just like you. And I said, look, here's my position. You guys do what you feel convicted to do. You have my applause. Feel good about it. We got no issues. I'm going to leave it alone there. You know I'm not being adversarial with you guys that I was this transparent to me. You're worth it to me. That, and again, like I was saying, in this church we have people on both sides of this. I want us to be able to strongly believe and support what we want to do without dividing the church and dividing the church family. You guys know how close I am to Eric Reed. Reed is like one of my best friends in the world. He hates Bob Norris. I mean, how can you go further than that? And yet, Eric and I are buddies. I want it to stay that way. Absolutely want it to stay that way. Davalu, my apologies.
No.
You have
no,
the final
this is your
word.
show. This is your show.
You have the final word.
I just wanted to say, I think this has been amazing.
Me
Because
too.
I think we have lost this in our society and in politics today. That people with differing opinions can sit down and talk. Because as I was growing up, this is what we did. So I appreciate that. I also want to commend you for getting involved
Amen.
in politics. But one thing that I want to challenge you to do that I don't see a lot in young people today, and it's something I learned in school when I was growing up. I did debate a lot in school. What they would always do is, if I was, say, anti-abortion, then I would be assigned to be pro-abortion in the debate. It's like, no. But
It's the
then
best way to learn.
it is the best way to learn because it strengthens your position. And I grew up in a family that was very legalistic church. My mother never wanted me to visit other churches with my friends. And I believe that you should question what you're being taught in your faith. If you're a pastor biblically sound, he will never, I'm going out on a limb, but he will never condemn anybody for saying, why do you believe that? I believe this. Show me. And I
Welcome
think,
to Wednesday night.
and what I would send you forward with a challenge, not only with Dan, but you should know Dan Wilson as well as anybody can if you're going to advocate for him. You shouldn't have to read off a piece of paper. You should know what he stands for and why he stands for. Also know your sources and understand whether that source is credible, not only in and of themselves, but in the community. So, like, how do people view the information that's coming from Teresa Watt? Who is Teresa Watt? What is, because just being a researcher, if you're not an objective researcher, going to get slanted research, and that's what we have in society now. All these different organizations that are and they want you to believe, well, just because I say it, it's right.
If you massage the data long enough,
You'll
it will
get what you
confess
want.
to anything.
But what I love books with footnotes. Wait, I can read something and go back, and where did this come from? So I would challenge you to be that person. Adopt somebody else's attitude or their opinion. No, and I'm not saying she doesn't, but I'm saying no. And you should question people. Set with you questioning them, because I will tell you, for example, I know a lot about the helicopter unit, and I have questioned the crap out of that whole situation to the point that I'm sad. And I know why I believe, and I can point to why I believe what I believe. I think that's what you should do on everything, including not only Dan Wilson, but whoever you vote for. And if you're going to defend somebody, like if I defend Pastor Paul, I'm kind of staking my
Working, sorry.
The biggest complaint I've seen about Dan from people that I know, I would love to know how he's going to do what he says he's going to do. And nobody can figure out. I've tried to figure out. I've tried to make it to events. I can't. Do you know Liberty? Liberty Nation, and I'd love to talk to your father. He said, my father with you. And I've never gotten a phone call. I want to be able to say, well, I don't know what Dan's going to do. I'd like to say, well, Dan's going to do this. Opinion of whether or not I think it's a good or a bad idea. But none of us, including me, know how Dan's going to put together this sweeping plan that sounds great, but can you do it, and how are you going to do it? That would be that's my advice and my compliment to you. I think it's great that you're out hit the pavement and for the campaign. I think that's great. Whether or not we agree or disagree, we should take it.
I love the town square. Let's have conversation.
Amen.
You had a systematic process, and if you hadn't been interrupted by me, been making your case point by point, and I want to commend you for that.
Oh gosh, yeah. Sorry about that light bulb. Lord, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity for us to have conversation. I just pray that you would translate all of this information down to the grassroots of our hearts and our love for you, our love for each other, and our love for our community. Lord, I do pray for your blessing upon Dan Wilson and on his wife and every person that he's working with, that your grace would rest upon them powerfully and mightily, Lord, that you would place him exactly where he needs to be in the healthiest possible position. And likewise the same for Bob and for Susan. Lord, let your grace be upon them. And by all means, Lord, when there is a need for a adjustment in our persons, in our behaviors, in our attitudes, in our agendas, in our missions, do please, Lord, adjust us. We thank you.
I'm not sure where it'll all go at this point. I think that open conversation is always healthy. I appreciate you, and I will say this. Eric Reed remains my very close friend. I love him dearly, and I want the same for you too.
Karen's, I have a nonprofit that supports law enforcement, and Karen is my volunteer coordinator, or my fundraising coordinator.
Eric has legitimate gripes, and I'm not discounting that there is legitimate and there will be legitimate gripes against me. I'm an imperfect man and arrogant.